All right, so in this video, we're going to talk about Integrated Marketing Communications, or IMC. All right, so IMC is basically the idea that there's more than just advertising in the promotions mix. So we have internet, digital, personal selling, direct marketing, sales promotions, all these different techniques beyond just what we typically think of as advertising as part of the promotions P. So the way we're going to work through this is sort of go through the process of designing a campaign. I should say that before we get into that, the basic idea behind integrated marketing communications is that all of these different functions should work well together. So historically, agencies tend to be more specialized. So you might have your advertising agency that was somewhere in New York doing your creative, and you might have your own internal salespeople doing sales promotions that may be aligned or didn't align with that creative. You might have another firm that did PR, another one that did direct marketing. And so what could quickly happen is that your brand messaging could get sort of jumbled across the different channels and lack sort of a clear, consistent theme, which is important when we are trying to establish a brand identity. So this is basically the idea behind integrated marketing communications, is that as you move from one area to the other, one tactic, one strategy, one functional type of promotion to the other, you should sort of retain pieces from the others so that you have this consistent message. So this is why we saw a lot of ad agency integration happen. They went from being just sort of copywriting and creating ads to bringing a lot of other sales functions in-house so they could coordinate across those. All right, let's work our way through the steps from the book. So the first is identify and target a market. So just want to use this as an opportunity to reiterate when we're developing a target. If we're taking a jobs to be done perspective, we're really going to want to be developing those personas or those segments around a particular goal rather than a demographics first approach, which you often see marketers adopt because demographics are relatively easy to work with compared to something more hypothetical like goals or progress towards a goal. So just want to again remind you that when you're thinking about targets or personas, always try to think of them in terms of goals. All right. So next up, what are some general aims of advertising? So we might have to inform people or persuade them or remind them. So inform might be just like letting someone know something is out there. Persuade, we might be building an argument for why they should buy the thing. Maybe they've already bought the thing before, but we need to sort of keep that in what's called the consideration set. So when people say, oh, I got to go to the store and buy X, oftentimes they'll generate a internal consideration set of different versions they have to pick from. This is even more important in an online environment when people are like, oh, I'm going to Google this type of product, or I'm going to search this on Amazon and put it in my basket. If that product isn't top of mind and making its way into that consideration set, it may not be purchased. All right. So next what we're going to do is we're going to set some communication objectives. So we talked about SMART goals already. In terms of objectives or goals, we want something that's specific, so it has a number to it, and it has a time horizon to it. Those are sort of the key aspects of SMART goals. Also, we want to have something that's hopefully realistic. All right. So this is from the book. I just want to kind of show you it for a couple of reasons. One is that we often see sales processes depicted as these sorts of inverted funnels. So you'll hear a lot about funnels in sales in particular, but also in advertising, where we're going from sort of awareness to building a liking to getting people to buy the thing to ultimately, the other thing I wanted to point out was advocacy. So ultimately sort of the grand, desirable place would be not only do your consumers buy something and have a delightful experience with it, but they then go on to advocate that other people should buy it too. So we'll talk about why a little bit later why that's so important. Essentially, to give away the punchline, but advertising struggles with credibility sometimes. But word of mouth, recommendations you get from other people who you trust is seen as much more credible. So if you can, evolve your customer to be an advocate for your product, then you're in a good space. All right. So moving on, so designing the message and creating message content. So there's a couple several different kinds of appeals you could do. You could do a rational appeal. So a rational appeal could take a number of forms. So here we see, one on the left-hand side is very sort of high involvement, methodical. You're filling out a form. You're reading about a drug that you might take. It's a lot of information sitting there. Right? On the far right-hand side, we see kind of still a benefit, right? But the benefit is much, a little bit more simply presented, shall we say. So basically here, pop chips have this benefit of being, less guilty but more pleasure. So even in the same amount of calories, we get more chips, essentially. The one in the middle doesn't have any text at all, but it looks like it's for some sort of hair gel, and we see that they've used that hair gel to make this very stylized haircut. So presumably, that shows the product in action being used to create this thing, which is a kind of a rational appeal. We also have emotional appeals, so we could have some that sort of a lot of charities or requests for donation to the Humane Society, or imagine like, what if you died, how would your kids feel, those sort of emotional appeals. We also have things like humor appeal. So a humor appeal, like typical Super Bowl commercial with a joke and a punchline and a famous comedian. Basically the idea here is that when people watch the ad and they feel positive emotional response, that positive emotional response sort of attaches itself to the brand, and then when you have the opportunity to purchase potato chips, maybe you'll buy Lay's because somewhere in your mind there's a positive association with the brand. Consumers also get bombarded with a lot of messages which are called fear appeal. So fear appeal essentially says, this bad thing could happen to you unless you do this thing or buy this product. Or don't do this thing. So here we have a fear appeal from Mothers Against Drunk Driving that says, don't, drink and drive, don't text and drive, or else you could, end up in this horrible situation. A lot of consumer products offer, sort of set up a fear appeal, like, oh, what happens if you have bad breath on a date? Get Listerine so that you can avoid that negative situation. So a lot of advertising falls under this category of fear appeal, whereby again the advertiser says, here's this negative situation, if you do what we say, you'll avoid that negative situation. You can have a moral appeal. Moral appeal sort of evokes some sort of higher kind of moral imperative, something like making the world a better place, or being more socially responsible or considerate. Now the one in the middle there is from, I think we talked about this before, from a famous study where they were trying to get people to reuse their towels in a hotel room. And what they found was the most effective thing to make that happen was saying, X percent, it's pretty high. I think like 70% of people in this hotel room reuse their towels, and putting that as the marketing, that turns out to be a really effective way at getting norm compliance. The other ways by saying this is just good or people should do this tend to be less impactful. The most impactful things tend to be like, other people are doing this thing, you should do it too. Slice of life, these can be both educational and aspirational. So slice of life essentially shows the product being used in a particular social situation. So how do we know what a certain kind of watch is for? Well, if we see someone wearing in a casino, James Bond wearing in a casino in Monte Carlo, we know it must be like an expensive, fashionable watch that rich people might have. If we see a beverage being drunk by, teenage boys late at night, we know, okay, it probably has lots of caffeine and energy and that kind of thing. Right? If you see a resort featuring, pictures of kids, we know that resort is family friendly. So in these sort of slice of life, again, they are designed in part to sort of educate consumers what the product is about by showing how it would be used. Here's a great example of a reminder ad. So Absolut Vodka was, I don't know where it ranks today, but for quite a while it was the number one selling vodka in the U.S. And they had a series of very critically acclaimed ads, and you see a lot of them pictured here. So it would be like Absolut LA, and then they would have the shape of the Absolut bottle, but set as a pool in Los Angeles, or Absolut Fashion, and you see a thing they make dresses on, or Absolut Aspen, and you see ski runs. So it was always this kind of, it sort of brought to mind the iconic Absolut bottle, reminded people, they're like, oh yeah, Absolut's a vodka that I might buy if I needed vodka. And also had these, kind of interesting little jokes and, kind of cool visuals. And so they were just kind of a very successful ad campaign that went on for a long time. The one on the far left there is Absolut Subliminal, and I don't think you can see it very well in this picture, but you can see in the ice, they have the Absolut bottle pictured in the ice. And this is an inside joke to advertising, because back in the old days they used to put pre-Photoshop, but they would the art department would put in the ice maybe strange pictures, with the idea that had some sort of effect on people. Probably not so much, but that joke in particular might be a little bit specialized. So sometimes you see agencies creating ads for themselves. So I think this is a good example of that, where you have this sort of historical thing that happened a long time ago in advertising, when people were trying to leverage subliminal stuff, and they would put in sexy pictures into ice cubes for liquor ads and this kind of thing. And so Absolut is referencing that historical idea in their ad for vodka. And probably it was a big hit with people who were advertising professionals. I don't know if it would have had that much impact on consumers. And this is something that is a common critique of the advertising industry, that it creates ads for itself rather than something that's going to be for consumers. But that ad aside, this ad campaign was a very successful reminder campaign. All right, so we thought about some message content and thought about maybe what some objectives are. Let's think about budget. So how much do we want to spend? So we could just spend what we can afford, right? So, we only have this much money, let's spend that. We could, sometimes that number is based on a percentage of sales. So we're going to set aside 10% of sales to spend on advertising. We might think about what other competitors are spending. Well, these guys are running a lot of ads, so we better run a lot of ads as well. Probably the best one, though, that's a little more thoughtful, is the objective and tasks. So you would come up with a goal, think about what you need in order to accomplish that goal, and then think about how much it's going to cost to make that happen. So, when you talk about how budgeting for marketing spend, there's always sort of there's a lot of knee-jerk reactions that happen. They're doing a lot of ads, we should do a lot of ads, or we have this much money, or we're going to set aside this much money, that don't really think about what it is your marketing is trying to accomplish. And so kind of the moral of the story here is, anytime you have really any kind of marketing initiative, the best thing to do is think about what goal you're trying to achieve, and then figure out how much that's going to cost, and then base your spend on that. All right, developing strategies and tactics. So One thing I would just point out here with this graphic is, if you're not familiar with the distinction between strategies and tactics, tactics tend to be sort of short-term, tactical, individual actions, whereas a strategy is more of a long-term kind of a goal. So you might do a particular promotion with the idea that your long-term goal, that you're going to position yourself as a low-cost alternative or as a prestigious brand, whatever it is. And so then what you want to make sure are those tactics aligning with the ultimate long-term strategy. So a sort of lesson with IMC is that you may not want to, have a Kardashian promote your brand if ultimately you want your brand to be kind of positioned as a low-cost alternative, because that's not consistent with that space, right? So even though that would get you a lot of exposure, it's not really what you're trying to do, and vice versa. So running a short-term discounting kind of tactic when you're wanting to position yourself as a high-end luxury brand would not be a good tactic that matches with the long-term strategy. So that's just something I wanted to point out here. There's a couple marketing strategies it seems like it's a good time to talk about here, and that is push versus pull. So basically a push strategy says what we're going to do is we're going to push our product through the marketplace. So we are going to somehow incentivize retailers and wholesalers through a variety of tactics, which we'll talk about in a minute in the next lecture probably, to stock our product, to promote our product to consumers, and we're going to push it through the distribution chain. A pull strategy, on the other hand, is like, okay, we're going to talk to end consumers, we're going to build demand in the marketplace, and then that existing demand is going to pull the product through the channels, because they're going to start demanding that product. Retailers and wholesalers are going to start carrying that product, and those people are going to reach out to us in order to get the product so they can sell it. So in a push strategy, we're mostly talking to it's mostly B2B, and we're talking to the distribution channel. With a pull strategy, it's B2C, business to consumer, and we're mostly talking to consumers and having them create demand and having that demand pull through the channel. All right, so selecting promotional tools. So there's all sorts of promotional tools that we have at our disposal, and this is becoming more complicated all the time, which is why a lot of companies have turned to technology like programmatic advertising. So programmatic advertising is basically a kind of online sort of technical tools for buying things like search terms or putting ads on Facebook, and sort of bringing that all into one platform so that you can manage it effectively. So, all right, and that leads us to our next section, was we're talking specifically about advertising. So I'll go ahead and finish the video and move on to the next one.